today's topic will be Fabricator and Installer Qualifications. For those of you participating that wish to tweet about today's meeting, you can feel free to use the hashtag CSISPG, all one word. And with that, I do want to hand it over to David Stutzman and Louis Metcalf to get started with today's session. And Dave and Louis, over to you.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob. Well, this is Dave, and today I'm putting Louis on the spot because I'm out on the road calling in from Dallas, Texas. Probably one of the first times Louis and I have actually been in the same time zone when we've done this presentation.
But it's not the first time that you've been on the road.
Oh, for sure. So you get all the headache today. Thanks for taking control, Louis.
Oh, here.
So and how are you doing, and where are you? You're in the home office, I guess.
Yes, I'm in sunny downtown Nashville, Tennessee.
All right. So
it's very pleasant outside. It's in the mid-70s and low humidity and very comfortable.
Right. So I wanted to just maybe give a little background on how we came up with this topic for today. And it really comes out of several discussions I've been having with some of our own clients of late. They're looking for some way to improve the specification for installer, especially for installer qualifications, but it's also tending back towards manufacturers and fabricators. So we thought we would try to explore this with you today and see what some of your attitudes are. We have a couple of poll questions that will hopefully gather some of intelligence from all of you folks that you can share with Louis and I too. So one of the biggest concerns that was raised with my own clients was how do you go about this? And Louis, you want to move to the next slide? Our clients are actually asking us to be specifying warranties. And in some cases, I think that they're actually asking for the warranties as a substitute for trying to set the minimum qualifications for both, primarily for the installers. So they're looking for an installation warranty from the installer or subcontractor as a minimum protection for the owner. And I'm not convinced that's actually the best way to go about it. And well, I think you have a couple thoughts on that too, don't you?
Yeah, are we talking about installer warranties, or are we talking as opposed to manufacturer extended warranties, or standard product warranties? Most standard product warranties are only for a year or so. And of course, one of these days soon we need to do a session on warranties in general. But I'm kind of leery about requiring an installer warranty because they're usually only for 1 or 2 years. And, does the installer in fact have the financial wherewithal to satisfy a claim, to provide a remedy? I just don't know what that means. And I think the owner may ultimately have more rights under the statute of repose and the general contractor's general warranty under paragraph 351 of the general conditions, and that specifying a separate installer warranty could in fact muddy the water and confuse the lawyers who are handling the claim.
Could very well, and one of the things that I've actually discussed with our clients is rather than a warranty, why not consider something like a maintenance bond where you actually have a third party then becoming responsible for essentially for the workmanship, so that you know that you've got financial pockets that you can reach into should you need to, whether the contractor is viable anymore or not. And that hasn't got any traction, at least not with our clients. They're still somewhat insistent on the warranty approach.
Well, before we start talking about manufacturer qualifications, Why am I not? Oh, there we go. We need to take a quick look, a reminder, at the different categories of products that wind up being incorporated into improvements to real property. Because how we specify qualifications or select qualifications in many respects for the producers of products has to do with what kinds of product, the category of the products that we have. Oh, I forgot that you had a different slide.
I thought I would just let you go and see how far you got, Louis. So what I wanted to look at is, from a manufacturer standpoint, is are we going to be trying to specify qualifications through member organizations? And I've used that as one way to do this on a number of occasions. And go ahead to the next list. And the other one is whether or not we can actually rely on ISO certification. So,
a reminder,
hey, Rob,
ISO is International Standards Organization, and they have rules set up that you can, hoops that you have to jump through to become ISO certified for their basic thing. The basic certification that everybody's looking for is the 9001 that deals with consistency of production activities.
I think this might be a good place, Rob, if you want to try the first poll for all of our attendees today. So here, we're just trying to find out what you might do or what you are seeing. If you're not a specifier yourself, if you're a product representative, what do you see in the specifications to ensure installation quality? And if you're a specifier, what are you requiring the contractor to provide? And Louis, since I can't see any of the results, you're going to have to take it from here.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, we have 0% for warranties and 0 for warranties and qualifications. We have 25% for manufacturer/fabricator qualifications and 75% for installer qualifications.
Is it any surprises there for you, Louis?
Not really. Typically we specify manufacturer qualifications not as a separate qualification statement, but we pick the companies and the products that we have some level of confidence in through our experience with them, our technical research, or their published technical data. And so we don't normally specify that a manufacturer has to been producing the stuff that is in terms of standard products. But again, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We need to get to that next thing about the categories.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I think that in some cases, too, looking at the standard commercial master specification systems out there, the installer qualifications is not really a surprise, because most or the spec systems, whether it's master spec, spec link, spec text, they all include information about installer qualifications for many of the spec sections. So go ahead to the next one, Louis.
Okay.
So with the member organizations, and I think of several that are like this, like the Steel Door Institute, for instance, or the Steel Framing Manufacturers Association. One of the ways that we can try to ensure that we have some level of qualifications is that these organizations, through their membership, require the manufacturers to comply with a code of ethics, plus they also end up publishing their own set of quality standards. For instance, the Steel Framing Manufacturers Association has a standard that the members must comply with to be able to claim membership in the organization, which gives you some level of confidence in the stud products that these manufacturers are providing. And there are a number of others. I mean, even in the steel stud arena, I think there are 3 separate organizations dealing with steel studs. In the doors, there's SDI and HMMA, and the list goes on and on. So it's one way to try to qualify the manufacturers. Okay, so we want to go ahead, Louis?
There we go.
Okay, so just as the reminder, the next one we'll talk about is the ISO certification. And ISO has a series of certifications under the broad heading into 9000. Louis mentioned 9001, which is for manufacturers. What ISO certifications do is set up a consistency both in the process and presumably in the quality of the manufactured products, because the manufacturers are required to document their quality processes and must be able to demonstrate compliance with their quality program through an audit performed by to satisfy ISO. So this is another one I think that could lend some help to specifiers to be able to specify installer quality and manufacturer quality in particular.
There are also ISO standards for service providers such as AE firms, and it is possible to get ISO certification as an architectural or architectural engineering firm. Again, having to do with having your processes all spelled out, written out, and then for keeping up with them on a consistent basis. But we were going to talk about for manufacturer qualifications, again, the product categories, product certifications, and evaluations. So we'll go to categories. Of course, there are manufactured units that come out of a box, basically, and you screw or bolt them to the construction, like grab bars or roof hatches. Then you have manufactured or extracted basic materials, paint, plywood, stone. Then you have manufactured systems for custom fabrication. And an example of that would be curtain wall, where the individual components and members are standard manufacture, but they are assembled together in custom configurations. Pre-engineered canopies and even pre-engineered buildings fall into that kind of category. And then finally we have the products that are actually made to custom designs from basic materials. And examples of that would be architectural woodwork and precast cladding, where something is, there are no standardized parts in it at all, except, well, in the case of woodwork, you have some hardware, but in generally it's not a standard product.
And
so,
Louis, you see these product categories as something that would require different kinds of quality assurance requirements.
Yes, because obviously something that, they're making, the Bobrick, who are making hundreds of thousands of grab bars in a factory and then just putting them in a box and shipping them to the site, that's quite a bit different from a local woodwork shop that's making custom style and rail wood veneer paneling for a courtroom. and the quality levels is quite a bit different. So that's what you're going to talk about when we talk about certification. What certifications are available?
Okay, so the certifications then for industry associations, general and both and specific. And one of the things, and I'm not sure how you would actually necessarily classify each one. It might be more an interpretation on your own part. The association.
By general, I mean an organization like PCI, the Precast Concrete Institute, or UL. You know, things that have UL labels that where it's a kind of a generic overall certification, as opposed to industry associations that certify specific things. Because, for example, the AWI, American Woodwork Institute, has a quality control program where they actually certify the local shops, the actual fabrications that come out of a local shop to make sure that they, in fact, meet the specifications.
Right, and they would certify specific to whether it's cabinetry or doors or paneling and a number of other items. So it does get down to a very specific end product. And
even that they use the right grit of sandpaper in the production, that sort of thing.
Okay. The one thing, and that just came up on a project this week, that I'll share with the group, and when you talk about the industry specific, and Lewis happened to mention AWI, thanks Lewis, because that worked really well. We didn't even plan this, but one of the things that came up is the AWI quality manual. And if you look at the wall paneling, and the wall paneling actually references back to the basic products that are involved in producing the paneling, that the condition on a project that came up was the architect actually selected bamboo as the veneer to be applied to wall paneling. Well, within AWI, they have very specific exclusions within the quality standard, and bamboo, because it is not a hardwood veneer, is one of those exclusions. So even though you could specify, in this case, the wall paneling to be certified under AWI, the actual veneer would be excluded under their program. So you need to be careful that you understand the extent of each of these programs when you're using them, to make sure that you're going to get what you want, or what the intent actually is when you're all done.
And some of the general industry association certifications are at different levels. For example, the PCI plant certifications are different for structural precast as opposed to architectural precast, as opposed to miscellaneous architectural trim and other pieces. Similarly, AISC has different levels of certification for structural steel. And so you have to decide what's appropriate, what level of certification is required for your specific project.
Okay. And so moving on then to ICC evaluation service. Now and we included that here for certification, but I consider that to be more certification of code compliance, especially the items that are not specifically mentioned in the code. That was really the original intent of the evaluation service, that manufacturers could submit their product for evaluation to determine compliance, even though the product was not mentioned in the code by name or by type. So it doesn't really give you necessarily a quality control other than code compliance. Are you using it for any other purpose?
No, but
that, Lewis?
No, but in terms of our clients' needs, code compliance is definitely a quality attribute, or an attribute of quality, I should say.
Right, and it's one that there is
but not necessarily of longevity or performance.
Right, and there is no option. Code compliance is not optional.
No, but things sneak through sometimes, and that's why it's helpful. And of course, we did a session on ICC evaluation service, and actually had one of their engineers who does the evaluations on the acceptance criteria, and some of our listeners may want to go back to YouTube and listen to that. It was a really good and informative session. What the guy had to say was really helpful. But the interesting thing about the evaluation reports is they do have requirements in there for installation that need to either be specified, or when you're going out on the job site, you need to be aware of what those installation requirements and limitations are to evaluate the quality of the installation.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And those limitations are sometimes critical, because knowing where a product cannot be used is often more telling than a partial list of where it can be used.
Indeed. And then, of course, my firm has 3 offices in Florida, and we do a fair amount of work in South Florida in particular. And so many of the products that we specify for windows and doors have to have an NOA, a Notice of Acceptance from a government agency, as a certification that the product is has a certain quality level demanded by the state. And it's related to code compliance, but again, that's another third-party certification for products that is available.
Yeah, and I find that those kinds of requirements, the government agency requirements, are more on a local level than on necessarily a national or state level. Like the City of New York also has, similar to NOA, they have their own certification service that issues what is known there as MEA numbers, indicating that the products are acceptable for use in New York City.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'd never done a job in New York City, so interesting.
So are you seeing other than at a local level for the government?
No, it's local or regional.
Mm-hmm.
South Florida. And then there's the issue of product evaluations, and these can be highly specific. For example, you may want to specify an independent testing report, or special pre-installation testing report. The first one there has to do with a more general testing of the product's general requirements. For example, let's take sealants. You would check the elongation, the modulus, and that sort of thing. The second one might be special testing of the product, a sealant on use with a white marble or a travertine marble, to make sure that it's not going to discolor the stone or have any other adverse effects, or to determine the level of priming or surface preparation that is necessary. And then we have engineering judgment letters. If your hollow metal doors come in various standard sizes that have been tested and labeled with the UL labels, but if you need a fire-rated door that is a swing door, hollow metal door, that is 10 feet tall and has leaves that are 5 feet wide, like for a stage, a theater stage, to move scenery in and out, you're not going to be able to get that in terms of right off the shelf kind of stuff And so what happens is that the manufacturer's engineers will write an engineering judgment letter and seal it with their seal, and usually that's acceptable to the local code officials, code enforcement officials, as being a certification that it does in fact meet the code requirements or whatever requirements.
Right. So those engineering judgment letters are typically used to show, again, to show code compliance to some degree. The oversized fire-rated door is a great example. The one that we see routinely, only because there are so many different combinations, would be the slab edge joint, the slab out to the curtain wall, and how do you fire stop that joint? Because no matter what you design, it's not going to match any tested assembly.
Yes, from one of the standard UL designs, right?
Right,
Yeah,
it'll never match.
Very common. And the NFPA 285 testing has become a major issue on a lot of buildings is the same way.
Yeah,
okay.
But and we're seeing more and more the manufacturers are finally coming up with a Chinese menu almost to pick and choose the materials to put together that are allowable under NFPA 285. So that's been a great help. The one thing I did want to just touch on before we start into the next, and that's okay, you could stay there if you like, the pre-installation testing, and this could be extended even to full-scale mock-ups and laboratory testing that's often done for building envelopes. You know, that really does become a significant quality control function, both for products and installation.
Yeah, because you get into issues that for example, a standard curtain wall system, once it's had wind blown against it in a certain configuration, and once it's had the rain blown against it by a large propeller mounted on an airplane motor, you may have to have some adjustments in where the weeps are located and where the flashing is located and other issues that can be then documented, and so that becomes a form of certification of a performance quality. Right.
Okay, so Rob, why don't we try the second poll question? I think we've probably gone beyond it a little bit, but we'll see where our audience here today thinks, what certifications are specified to control quality. And again, if you're writing the specs, what are you using? If you're having to comply with the specs, what do you see in those specifications that are being written for you?
Yeah, I'm curious to see if anybody at all specifies manufacturer certifications, unless you're doing a GSA job where they won't allow you to name names in Part 2.
Okay, so this is up to you again, Lewis.
Okay. Well, the results are still coming in.
Okay, well, you tell us when you're ready, because I can't see them.
Okay, well, the great majority, about 80%, are for industry association certifications, which is we would expect. A surprising 29% actually specify ISO certifications. 60% are specifying third-party certifications, and a full third of our group are actually specifying manufacturer certifications.
Well, that's interesting, and I'm surprised at the number actually using ISO certifications, because I think in our own practice I've only rarely used that.
I don't think I've ever done it. I've been writing specs since sometime in 1976 or 77, and I don't think I've ever done that. Well, not to say that I shouldn't have sometimes, but
that's probably because you predate ISO.
Yeah, well, the mimeograph stains on some of my shirts give me away, don't they?
Yeah, you and I both. Okay, so now we can go ahead and move into the installer qualifications, and this is my kind of field inspector armed with his coffee cup. I'm loving that photo.
No, he's actually the one of the workers. See, he's got an impact drill there.
No, he's one of the inspectors trying to find out what was done after the fact.
Well, we know it's going to be good if it's a CSI member.
That's true.
Done right. So again, we'll talk a little bit about the installer quality assurance categories, and then how are installers evaluated and who should evaluate them. Louise, before we start, Louise, sorry about that, Louise. Schlatter comments, use manufacturer certifications when the expectation is that the manufacturer will be warranting an installed system, such as a roofing system, insulation, membrane, flashing, and accessories. We may be, there may be a terminology issue, but thank you for that comment, Louise. So what do we expect out of an installer to get a quality installation for our owner? Because that's what we want. We want something that there are going to be no callbacks, that it's done right the first time, it's done on time, there aren't delays in the construction. And so business skill is actually a very high component of that. Does the installer firm have the financial backing to be able to buy product? Do they have enough people on staff to install it? Do they show up on time? In the same way that we want employees to show up on time for our firms, does the installer have a track record of showing up on time when the general contractor expects them to show up?
Well, and what do you think here, Louis? Years in business, does that count for anything?
It may or may not. Certainly that's, the easiest way to do it is you want somebody that's been around, that has survived for 5 to 10 years. Gives you some level of confidence, but I don't know how accurate it is, because the personnel who actually do the work for the installer may be there may be a very high turnover, but the parent company may be around for 10 or 11 years, but the actual people who are working on the project have only got 6 months experience.
Yeah, and I think the one difficulty in trying to specify installer qualifications, installer as a business or as an entity, is that you're trying to specify what really becomes the processes that the business uses to be able to ensure that they can actually meet the requirements of the specifications. And Louis mentioned a couple other things, but probably one of the biggest elements is that they're able to actually accurately estimate the project, and they'll be able to organize the logistics to meet the schedule. Because the logistics is something that is crucial for the overall construction schedule, and to be able to manage that. So what I don't see most of the specifications addressing is that level of detail for the installers themselves as a business entity. And I wouldn't even know, even if I did try to specify them myself, how do you actually evaluate that level of qualification to know that you have the right business performing the installation for you?
Well, of course, that's what we're going to talk about a little more here in a minute, and that's a problem. But on the other hand, that's what general contractors are licensed by the state to do, and that's their field of expertise, not mine. And so I think that says a lot about not only who should set the qualifications, but who should evaluate them. And
so
of course,
what are you saying, Louis, that the general contractor is the one that should be setting the installer qualifications? Is that what I heard you say?
In many respects, well, especially with respect to the business skill and the general construction skill and the sufficient staff, because we're not in a position to. I mean, I can write under installer qualifications, have sufficient staff, but what the heck does that mean? I don't know what that means. You know, is 2 people enough, or do they need 20? It's a lot. The third bullet there is the one that's the easiest to specify, and the one that it's most easy to enforce, I think, is what level of skill and expertise does the installer is expected to have for a given product, as opposed to these general construction and business skills and having sufficient staff.
So general skills for product, meaning that they may have experience having installed the product before.
Yes, we want. That's what we want. Is that this is not the, especially if it's something that requires a high level of technical skill, like high performance coatings, as opposed to ordinary paint, and
or concrete staining.
And polishing, yes.
Well, yes, that's one of my favorites because it is 100%, in my opinion, dependent upon the mechanics in the field.
Absolutely, and if it comes out bad, there's not much you can do about it to fix it after the fact.
That's true, and one of my first experiences with it, we learned the hard way. And the proof is still there. If anybody wants to travel to Atlantic City and go to the Bally's Casino Transportation Center and look at the stained concrete floor, it looks like mud.
Well, in the watercolor business, mixing more than 3 colors always provides muddy color, so maybe that's an issue too. Tommy Smith reminds us that in evaluating, or setting, I should say, qualifications for installers, we do have to keep in mind to be careful about getting into means and methods.
Means and methods. Well, I don't know that you might consider it means and methods, but I'll go back to Bally's stained floor. After the first experience, and at the time, staining concrete floors was pretty popular, at least in the Philadelphia area, we resorted to a field mock-up. We required the actual mechanics' names to be submitted for the field mock-up, and we had the contractor verify that only those individuals are actually performing the work once the mock-up was approved.
Yes, and I have specified that many times that the people who do the mock-up have to be the ones that are doing the final work.
But do you ask for names?
Not necessarily. You know, we'll talk about that when we get into these certifications, because I have some concerns about liability when it comes to receiving data on qualifications for installers.
Okay. I can't wait to hear your opinion.
Well, let me catch up with a couple of comments. Steve Laundry says, for spec sections with very specialized work results, I have included installer with blank years experience with a successful record of installation of product name of similar scope to this project within the last 10 years. This will help prevent unqualified installers being considered by the GC. Yeah, there's always the issue of the 2 guys with the pickup truck, and their credit card has got just enough left on it that they can go to the lumber yard and pick up a couple of buckets of materials, but whether they're really qualified to install it is another question.
Yeah, and you do have to be careful with years experience, because I will tell you, for a fact, in Virginia, if it's a publicly bid project, years' experience is not permitted.
Yes, I have run into that. I think there are a couple of other states that are that way. And then John Peters says, when specifying manufacturer certifications, or he asks, is it imperative to make sure all installers are certified on the product being installed? No. I think manufacturer's certification is a different issue from installer certification. In the case of the manufacturer certification, we're looking for some evaluation by some third party that the precast plant knows what it's doing and will produce a high quality product. Whether it gets hung on the building right is another question. Now, in some cases, and we're going to talk about that, we're going to ask that the installer be the producer of the product that's being installed. And of course, Kevin Chauvin says, when I specify finished hardware, I expect that the installers must be trained by the manufacturer on installing their products. Phil Kebs says, and we are going to get into these. So let me start first, and then I'll come back and pick up a couple of more of these comments.
Okay. See, I've put you in the spot here, haven't I? You know?
I'm in the hot seat today, David. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I thought I was on the hot seat being in Dallas. At least from the temperature here.
Well, here are the categories that I thought of, or that David and I thought of. So, experience evaluated by the general contractor, and as I say, I'm much more comfortable with that in one sense, because the owner has a comeback against the GC if something goes south. And to talk about that just a little bit is that regarding, do I want to see qualification data as an informational submittal? Certainly not an action submittal. MasterSpec is full of requests for installer qualifications. And I have concerns about that for liability reasons for two things. One is that even though it does not require a positive action for an informational submittal, you just throw it in the file cabinet for record purposes. If something
after you review it,
that's true. That's my point. Is that there would be, if there was a problem with the installation, there would be a presumption that we had reviewed that material because we asked for it. If you ask for stuff, you pretty much have to look at it, if nothing else, just to see if it's responsive. And then the contractor would argue, well, since you looked at the installer qualification data and you did not object to that installer, you're partly responsible for the fix. And I think, so I just don't want that to even come up as a possibility. So I have never specified submittals for installer qualifications. Well, I won't say never. There are some very rare exceptions where I think it might be meaningful. But I would much rather put that responsibility on the GC, because legally we can rely on the GC's skill, expertise, and integrity for making those decisions. The second thing is that suppose I get this installer data and I say, I have had problems with this guy in the past. I don't, or some other good and sufficient reason to say that you do have some objections to it. Well, the chances are by the time you get that submittal, because it's going to come in with the product data and the shop drawings, the GC already has a subcontract with that entity. And so if you object to them at that point, if the GC has to get out of its subcontract and then hire somebody else to do that work, that's going to mean a change order for my owner. So that's why I'm very leery of receiving qualification data. How about you, David? You specify at every job?
I do not specify at every job, but one of the things that we have done to specify installer qualifications, we have asked for pre-qualification of certain installers. And I would go back to, and that would be evaluated during the bid process or ahead of the bid to allow us to advise the owner to select one that we believe would be appropriate. And this would be something that might be a very complex installation or something that's critical to the look of the building or the function of the building.
Right. Well, so
it allows you to pick and choose or narrow down the field
get back
of the
to your
installers.
Your polished concrete is a perfect example of that.
Right.
But with a project that's a negotiated general contract, then that is a luxury that pre-qualification is a luxury you may not have.
Well, if it's negotiated, you may be able to talk through the subcontractor list even ahead of signing the contract. And I would suggest, even on a hard bid job, that you still have the opportunity before signing the contract to have the contractor, the GC, identify his subs, and the owner always has the right to object to any of the subs.
Absolutely.
So he may pay more, but it's still a level of control that the owner can exercise.
And interestingly enough, a little known fact is that section format actually has a place in Part 3 to list acceptable installers.
Correct.
But to get back to the question of experience, Phil Kabza remarks that Master Spec's definition of experienced in Division 1 addresses the number of similar projects completed rather than a length of time, and defaults to 5 successful projects. And certainly I think that is more meaningful than some arbitrary period of time. And would that be acceptable for public work in Virginia?
It is. I mean, they just expressly prohibit years experience as a criteria.
That makes sense. Okay. Let's see. Kurt Schwarm says, do you believe specifying minimum quality of workmanship is good practice instead of installer qualifications? Well, I think it's a little of both. That we want some level of assurance up front that the installer is qualified to do the work. And of course, we have to have the right specifications, because even qualified installers occasionally slip up and miss things and that have to be fixed. Wayne Yancey states, we specify manufacturer product reps be extra eyes at the job site for startup and completion. And of course that gets into that's quality control at the end rather than quality assurance. But yes, that's certainly a viable technique. Wayne also says, rather snarkily, experience of trade evaluated by the GC is equal to the lowest sub-bidder. Now, Wayne. Tommy Smith says this responsibility for performance should dictate establishment of installer qualifications. And that kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier. If the GC is on the hook for a good job, it's his job basically to do the evaluations. We can set standards. 5 successful projects, 10 years experience, whatever. but it's up to the GC, I think, to be primarily responsible for picking who it wants to do business with.
Right, and there are many other considerations that they're going to use for sure. I mean, logistics, again, meeting schedule, being able to deliver the product in time, that all goes into it. The fact that the GC may have prior experience with one installer over another.
Sheldon has a good point. He says, where does it say that you can't ask for evidence of something you specified? For example, the specifications could require an installer to have a specific certification for the reasons discussed. I don't want to see it as a submittal. But if later I want to see evidence of that certification, I see no reason why I can't ask for and get it. And yes, I feel the same way about manufacturer instructions. MasterSpec, bless their hearts, has a number of places where they hide that in there in even the action submittals. So if you receive manufacturer instructions, you're responsible not only for reading them and understanding them, but for enforcing them on the job site. And I don't want to do that. However, right now we're having an issue where some windows are going into one of our projects, and we have some questions about the installation, and so I advised the project architect to ask the GC for a copy of the manufacturer's instructions that we can look at after the fact and compare with what's going on and say, yep, or nope. Michael Smith says, QA/QC, requirement for product rep to be participant during construction process can also be considered QA, correct? The manufacturer cannot provide this. If the manufacturer cannot provide the service, for instance, then that specific QC role could not take place. Yes, there's a sense in which that's true, that you have to make that assumption. Dennis Burge asked, why does MasterSpec have reference to welding certifications? Does the GC submit them? Do those during CA review approve them? And that's the last bullet in this list, that there are rare certifications for individual workers, and AWS welders is one of those.
Well, and Louis, I think that that's becoming less and less rare at this point, because AWS on the architectural side is one, but for instance, SSPC has a painter certification.
Yes.
That's primarily for industrial painters. There are a number of organizations out there that are actually certifying individual craftsmen now. One is the Firestop Contractors Association is offering that certification. There are a couple of others that are working on individual craftsman certification. And honestly, I believe the industry is going this direction, where virtually at some point, every craftsman out there is going to have some certification, almost like go back to medieval times when they had to belong to a guild to be able to provide a service.
Electricians and plumbers have to be licensed, or at least
licensed or certified for these other craftsmen that are not under a licensing law.
Right.
So I think it's coming. And
we
Louis,
need to wrap up.
You're going to have to forgive me because I do have to attend another meeting.
So any embarrassing or difficult questions that come after David leaves, please address them to his email address, which I will give you later in the show.
Thanks for that, Louis. And thanks to everybody for joining us today. And Louis will take good care of you wrapping up.
Okay. Well, as I say, here's some things that you can specify to try to control installer qualifications. In some cases, we want the manufacturer to actually do the installation. In most cases, we want manufacturer training. Sometimes we want manufacturer certification. There are products where neither of these is available. MasterSpec, bless their hearts, has a paragraph in there that is, I think, completely imaginary. I meant to actually excerpt it and put it here on the slide, where they talk about joint sealants being installed by someone who is licensed or authorized or certified by the manufacturer of the sealant. I don't know of any sealant manufacturer that does that. I could be wrong, but I think the general building sealants, that's not available. One of the strongest ones, of course, is a manufacturer warranty authorization. Many years ago, I specified a 4-ply premium built-up roofing system to have a 20-year no-dollar limit warranty. And when the building was complete, and the roofing installation was done, it was done perfectly. It was beautiful, one of the best roofs I've ever seen. The installer said, "Oh, by the way, I'm not authorized by Johns Manville to do warranted installations." The GC was aghast because he realized that he'd contracted to provide a 20-year roof warranty, and so that meant that he was going to have to provide that rather than the roofing manufacturer. So he quickly made a cash settlement with the owner to get out from underneath that obligation. But ever since then, I have included in all of my roofing specification sections for the different types of roofing that as an informational submittal, I want to see a letter from the manufacturer or a copy of a letter authorizing the installer to proceed with a warranted installation. And then we have industry association certifications that are available, and we talked about the individual worker association certifications that are becoming more common. So that brings us back to where we started, and I hope that you've got some ideas here about how we can. There's only so much that we can control with specifications up front, and what we do specify has to be reasonable. It has to be effective. There's no point in doing it, and it has to be something that we can enforce and that can be complied with. That is practical. So I hope that you enjoyed this. And as always, this is your show. This is your discussion group. David and I really appreciate all the questions and comments from the floor. This is exactly what we envisioned when we got into this business. And so if you have suggestions for topics of discussion, something that's really near and dear to you, or a problem or something that you have some special insight on, please let us know, and we'll try to accommodate you, because we're always looking for ideas. Rob, I'm going to turn back to you, and we will look forward to seeing you next month. I don't have a program to announce yet, but we'll try to get that out a little bit earlier than we did for the June session.
Thanks, Louis. All right, and with that, we'll end this month's meeting. Thank you all for attending, and you may now disconnect.